Yeah.
Welcome to the Oh So Spurs podcast, where we have a packed agenda and a great panel to discuss it all. Today we'll be going over our All-Stars performance, angry Ange Postecoglou, Solanke versus Gyökeres, Ange's comments about transfers, rating the window so far and how it's going versus our rivals. Are Moore and Lanksheare ready for the first team? Is Decky our stealth number 9? And the return of a Spurs legend and the famous incident with his brother. Welcome back, Eric Dier. We'll be previewing it all. And to discuss it today, we have Djed in sunny Carolina. How are you, Djed?
Doing good, doing good.
Good to see you. We have Stu in a hotel in Doha today. How are you, Stu? How's the fund?
I wish empty.
And we have Johnny over in Dublin. Welcome back, Johnny. How are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, all good. Looking forward to getting closer and closer to the real games starting now soon. So yeah, how are you yourself, Jim? Keeping well?
Doing very well, thanks. I have that tingle back just below my stomach because Spurs are returning, and I'm very excited. So let's start with the All-Stars performance, shall we? Because there was quite a lot to unpick from that. We had just, it's very much a makeshift defence still. We are still without Mickey. Well, they'll be back for the Bayern games, but Mickey van der Ven, Romero, Udogie, and Richarlison were not available for the game.
Bentancur as well.
And Bentancur was unavailable too. But still, it was great to see some players like Bergvall and Gray in action once again that we've witnessing for the first time in Spurs shirts. But did you manage to watch the game, and did you have any thoughts about the performance? Notice anything about the lineups that you found interesting going into?
Obviously the talking point I think that everyone kind of came away with was our starting number 9, Dejan Kulusevski. I think that's going to be the thing. That was the thing that caught me off guard the most. I think it took him a while to kind of figure out where he was, because you can practice as in a position that you don't play for as much as you want, but it'll in a game, instinct takes over at a certain point. And so if you spend a lot of your time playing as an 8 or a winger playing as a 9 is going to be something that's you're just doing different things, right? You're covering different positions and pressing. You're pressing a different man. You're staying in a different place and rest defense. All of that's going to change, and I think that it's good that he's getting minutes for this in preseason, especially if this is something that Ange wants to deploy in using an American term, a regular season game. But I'm excited for this. I think that this means that I love it when Ange does these kind of I don't know what to call it. He experiments, I guess, and I love it even more when he does it in a preseason game, because sometimes when the experiments don't work out in a regular season game, it's not the most fun thing to watch, I would say. So yeah, I think all things considered, I think that Decky did really well. I think Son had his best performance of the preseason pretty clearly. Whenever Son is finishing, especially for that second goal, when he's finishing like that, if he can carry that form into the season, he'll have another fantastic season, I think. And I am gutted that Bergvall didn't get a goal. I cannot believe that didn't go in. Just hit the underside of the bar about as hard as you can, and just half a centimeter off from smashing down and into the back of the net. Yeah.
He's exciting, isn't he?
Yeah.
I think he could be, just because of his age, I think if he was 25, 26 years old and he'd come from a South American club, we'd all be super excited seeing him as a significant upgrade on the squad and a really exciting player to look forward to for the year. But because of his age, I think a lot of people have kind of let that one slip under the radar. Plus the fact, because we signed him a while ago, I think the initial euphoria has kind of settled down a bit. But it's so good to get seeing him in action in this friendly so far. But Stu, did you have similar thoughts to Deej or anything to add to those comments?
Yeah, I thought it was probably the best performance from the kind of the starting 11 and all the friendlies so far. Because I thought most of the other friendlies it was more kind of the backup, the youngsters who looked more impressive than the regular, kind of the senior pros. But I thought this was the first one. They really looked like they clicked. It might have also helped. I don't want to put too much of a damper on it, but it might have also helped by the fact they're playing a team of all stars, not a team who play together all the time. So they were also rather disjointed. I think, not wanting to have too much toxic positivity. Sometimes, we need to take into account who we're playing, the level we're playing, etc. But I think in general, it's been very promising. I thought Bergvall, before he kind of got tired, he looked amazing. And it's not a surprise playing on the heat, the training they've been going through. And, you can just look at him and you think how Odegaard, when he came to Arsenal, took him maybe a season or two to warm up, and then he's up there with one of the best players in the league. I hate to say it, but it's true. And if we have the same kind of development from Bergvall, we're going to be absolutely enjoying this lad for years to come.
Yeah. And Johnny, would you agree? Was there anyone else on the pitch in particular that made you excited going into this season?
I mean, it was nice to see Archie Gray actually in midfield for the first time, and yeah, I just love his composure and his just always looking to get forward. He's very ambitious, very mobile, and also really, I think a lot of people were sort of suggesting he might not have the physicality, but that's absolutely not the case. In fact, as you say, the same about Bergvall. Is listening to something or reading something when people were, I'm not sure who it was, but it was suggesting that whenever he signed for Spurs, that the attitude of the players in the league in Denmark changed towards him, and he was a bit of a marked man, and he had to sort of really show, his mettle to combat that kind of extra attention. So I think that's probably been a good thing if that is the case. I suppose the other obvious reference which we should be making is just the Yang Min Hyuk showcase. So and the other signing, to see him properly for the first time. And I thought he looked pretty bright in the first half. Now, what his role is going to be is probably going to be a couple of seasons, most likely, before he's sort of realistically playing regularly for the first team. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. We've looked at the youth this summer, and there's probably players further ahead than we might have anticipated. I thought that he definitely had Royal on toast. I know Royal's not necessarily playing in his best position, but I thought he looked really quick. He looked really direct. He had a pretty good effort. He nearly scored towards the second part of the first half, just hit over the bar. And before that, a 60-yard break, just a little bit of a loose pass. So, yeah, it was exciting to see that, and unusual to see a Spurs player playing against Spurs when you see him for the first time. So, definitely worth mentioning that. But yeah, a lot to look forward to. And obviously Ange's kind of meltdown in the first half was quite entertaining as well. He was just not hanging back there, really giving it to the players, full pelt, which is good to see as well. I mean, I think it's just being a really professional, serious, as it should be, pre-season. But I think the scheduling of the games, the frequency of the games, I think finishing off with the 2 games against Bayern, especially obviously the one back home, it's a really well planned tour, and just we're obviously all really interested to see what happens in terms of personnel. It's been a very helpful tour, I think, from the point of view of looking at where are we standing with next year, with obviously the Spence situation, which is a huge positive. And then, of course, the young boys, the lads that we've spent the money on, who we were anticipating, Bergvall and Gray, but I think also the guys from the academy. So there's an awful lot of positives that have come from this tour. So it's a lot to look forward to from it.
And we will go into that in more detail shortly, because we are going to be covering whether we feel, based on this pre-season and comments so far, whether these academy players are in a position where they will be starting more league games and Europa League games for us this season, and the impact of going out to sign players ahead of them, what that does to their development. So whether we're getting the balance right. Everyone wants us to play the young players until we play the young players, and then it's that classic circle.
But I have one more thing I'd like to add. I'd like to disagree with Johnny on one thing. I've seen Spurs players play against Spurs many a time. Tanguy and Ndombele, man, half the games he was the best player on the pitch. Half the games I think he was wearing the wrong colors. But now, other than that, I wanted to echo your praise of Archie Gray. I do think the one area that I'm looking for him to improve a little bit, because I'm not gonna say everyone was all the time. I think his passing left a little bit to be desired. I think his passing range is something that seems to be able to be improved upon. I don't know if that's just because it's a preseason thing and he's still learning the system, which it's certainly possible that it is. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But I think that was probably the biggest weakness of his game. I also want to go back to my regular positivity and give a huge shout out to Jamie Donnelly. I think that him at left back. I usually praise Spence for coming back, our other backup wing back, Spence, because I think he's done a fantastic job making himself an option again. Ange's comments about him have continued to be positive, which is really exciting, because I think that there's a fantastic player in there. But yeah, I think Donnelly's, the fact that we haven't said anything negative about him, and he's been starting at left back for I think, every preseason game, as far as I can remember, or at least played there every preseason game. I think that he has been fantastic, and I'm interested to see if he carries this position over into the season, because I know that he's generally more of a midfielder, but the way that Ange plays currently with the inverted wing backs, and especially the left side, because of how Udogie tends to play, they basically play as a midfielder anyway. So I'm curious to see if we look for him or even someone of his profile to bring in if we decide that he's still too young and needs another loan somewhere. I'm curious to see how we handle that backup position.
Well, I think we're sliding the conversation towards transfers, which is good timing, because I wanted to next ask around Ange's comments regarding what more we need to do this window. And the summary of the comments were essentially, the start of the window, it was need to get players in early. It's really important to do that, etc., etc. Fast forward to this week, where the comments were, I don't want to just go out and sign anyone for the sake of it. Long story short, I'd rather wait. We don't get everyone right now. It's not the end of the world. Stu, you made some comments about that earlier, didn't you? In our group, you weren't quite sure, or was that more around Son's contract actually? But anyway, back to the Ange comments first. What did you make of? And do you think is this a repeating pattern with Spurs? We've seen it before with other managers. Is it a red flag for you, or
No,
is it not something you're worried about?
I don't. I think the fact that Ange is quite calm, and I don't think he would really be someone that toes the party line just to, toe the party line. I think if he wasn't happy, he would make it clear he wasn't happy. And he also specified that nothing's changed with regards to the players that we targeted before the season, the transfer market opened, which that they haven't gone somewhere else, that we're still chasing them, and that everything is just going a little bit slower, most likely due to the Copa America and the Euros. So I think, yes, he wanted them early. Would it have made any difference anyway? Because we're missing all of our players who are at the Copa America or the Euros. So most likely we are targeting players who are at those. And if we wrap those up in the next week or so, they'll be joining the same time the other players come back. So I don't think there's anything particularly to worry about on that.
Go on, sorry, Dej. You go.
Yeah, I think that the players that it's more important to get in early in general, especially in a year like this year with Copa and the Euros, where you're not going to get many instant first teamers in immediately because they're all going to be playing for their nation. I think that the players that's really important to get in early are the youngsters, and I think we did that by getting Bergvall done February 1st, basically. Archie Gray in before the start of the preseason, and I think that like those kind of players are the ones that I would worry about more in terms of, because they, I think, usually need more time to like bed in, learn a system, and also potentially even get up to like match strength, especially for players like Bergvall who haven't played in the Prem before, because no matter how good the other leagues are, the Swedish league is nothing to by any stretch of the imagination, but the physicality in the Premier League is just a different animal to basically any league in the world. So having those players in early, I think, is way more important. Yeah. Whereas for first teamers, it would be nice. I'm not going to say that I don't wish we had more players in, but I don't think it's the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
Just look when Mickey van der Ven joined us last season.
Yeah, very true. And he just slotted in like a glove. And the set, yeah, like with Bentancur and Kulusevski as well in that January transfer window. So it's very much dependent on the player, like you say, Dej. And for some, it's more of an issue than others. But I don't think any of us could not deny that we'd much rather have everyone signed, done and dusted August 1st than we would to sign someone late. But equally, I'd rather have a better player at the end of the transfer window than a less good player at the start of the transfer window. So that's kind of what Ange is saying. It is a balancing act. And we did look at the numbers, right, of what are our rivals doing? That's normally a barometer of what's happening in the market. What are other Premier League clubs doing? Are they active? Are they not? Villa, very active, but they have sold their best player and acted accordingly. That creates movement, right? It takes one player to move for another to move. When you look at Newcastle, they've signed one senior player. When you look at Liverpool, they've signed none. Man United have signed 2. And Chelsea have signed 2 as well, I believe. But what we're trying to... was it
Chelsea
1?
have signed like 8 probably by now. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm talking about senior players. But I mean, we are... And Arsenal have signed 1. So yeah, it's not like everyone else is signing loads of players and we're sat on our hands not doing anything, it seems consistent with what the top six are doing. That it's 1 or 2 players on average is what clubs have signed, and most of them have been young prospects, apart from Villa. So it doesn't really concern me personally. Some of the players we're being linked with, guys, are Solanke and Dier. I have got their reports here as well from our fantastic scouting network tool. But it's interesting because what I've noticed about both these players is the profile that these wide players fit, which is kind of similar to what we get from the likes of Brennan Johnson, which is they both score their goals in various similar positions. They're drifting in and scoring in the central penalty box area. Typically from low crosses, which are coming from wide positions, which is pretty much the signature goal that we've been. You can see it here from Solanke as well, and Gyökeres if you're watching on YouTube. Those are very much Ange profile players, right? We've seen it before. Those seems to be the standard way in which he tries to have our system set up to score goals. It's that get it to someone like Brennan Johnson, low cross into the box, someone taps it in, or Johnson is there to tap in those goals. But Johnny, are you excited by either of these two? Do you think they fit the profile of what we need? Would you be happy if we signed one of them for £50 million?
Well, I don't. From what I can gather, it doesn't sound like Solanke's coming for £50 million. I mean, I don't know if Bournemouth have to sell. I suspect they don't. The rumours are he's not going to agitate for a move. Whether that's correct or not, I mean, you'd assume he'd prefer to be at a bigger club. But the fact that he's not looking to agitate to move, that's kind of the sort of player you want to have, actually, isn't it? If they're, a team player. But I suspect if we're going to sign him, then we'd need to bit more than that, significantly more than that, because of the fact that he's English, because of the fact he has proven. Yeah, I think it's fair to say he's proven in the Premier League. I know it's some people would claim that he had a really good season last year. He's obviously been far more available than Richarlison, and that's the situation, isn't it? With Richie and his injury situation, his propensity to be unavailable for large swathes of the season. And we had a great couple of months in the middle of last year when Richarlison couldn't stop scoring, and it was brilliant. And I think most of us would appreciate the fact that he is a really handy player to have. He's great off the bench. His work rate, his energy, I think his effect on his players around him. I really like Richarlison, and I wouldn't be in a rush to get rid of him. It's like, do we need another striker with this Kulusevski experiment? Is that going to be transferable into the Premier League? The fact that the likelihood is Sonny's on the left tomorrow and Johnson's on the right and Decky's in the middle again. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think that maybe potentially makes it slightly less pressing than before. And it's like when you're heaving out a huge. I don't know much about the other fella. I'm sure the other boys are more qualified to comment on him. Again, he's obviously scored a lot of goals in Portugal, and I know he has experience in the Championship. So, it's other people are better qualified to talk about him than me, to be perfectly honest with you. But I don't know. I think Solanke is a mobile player. I saw some interesting stats, whether they're accurate or not, on the group today. Seemingly surprised a lot of people on our group with his bona fides, the fact that his XG creation was pretty impressive. I don't know. I think it's a lot of money, but he's English, so that's what you have to do. And it's interesting. Yeah. I'd prefer him to Tony, probably, not least because of his mentality as a player, and I think his ability to slot in and be a team player. So yeah,
well,
I don't know.
Tony's pretty unlikely now because Thiago's out for 6 months with an injury. So Brentford, and that was their star replacement signing for Tony. So I imagine what they're going to try to do now is hold on to him for 6 months and see if they can sell him in January if he doesn't sign a pre-contract abroad. So, but before I move on to the Decky's a 9 question for Djed, Stu, I wanted to ask you, because you had some opinions on the Solanke and Gyökeres links, whether you think they're going to be signings we should be pursuing or not.
To be honest, the Gyökeres, I don't know that much about. I'll bow to DJ's more in-depth knowledge, having watched him. I've seen that he's succeeded in the Championship and he's succeeded in Portugal, so that would suggest he's technical and can handle physicality. But who knows if you can handle the jump up to the Premiership from those leagues. I think it's difficult when you look at leagues like Portugal, Holland, etc. A big jump. Some players can make it, some can't, and that's when you really need to drill down more into the attributes of the player. And with regards to Solanke, I have to admit, as Johnny said, the stats that were shown on the group with regards to his pressing, etc., surprised me. His XG was average. It was pretty much goal in line with his XG, and he's had one good season, but it could just be the start of him exploding. I mean, you don't know. And I definitely would have him over Tony. I mean, Tony, as I've said before, he scores a lot of penalty goals, and if you take those out, his goals per game ratio doesn't look that good at all. But I just think it is a lot of money. As Johnny said, the HG factor does play with that. I mean, Braithwaite was quoted, I think, 70, 80 million, and he's had one season in the Premier League. So, I mean, the price for English players is just stupid. But I just would hope that, we would be able to spend our money more wisely, having, that's what we have a huge office of data analysts and scouting team for.
It's funny, isn't it? It's like transfers in the market follow kind of the global economy. And it's like, particularly in like Europe, and it's obviously in a European league, if you look at like what's happening over here, like no one's rushing out to buy houses like they were. Everyone's being very cautious about what they buy. Prices for things are leveling out, and people have said, actually, I'm not going to pay any more money than that for a car or a house. It actually has hit the ceiling of how far you can push me. And I feel with footballers, and the Premier League clubs are also saying, £80 million for him. He's worth 40. I know I need him, but I don't need him to the point where I want to put a detrimental strain on my company, if you want to call it that. I hate to call a football club a company, but it's run by business people, so it is in their eyes a business. So, but Djed, as the boys keep pushing this topic to you, Gyökeres, do you want him?
I watched him. I have to admit, I didn't watch him much last season at Sporting, but I watched him when he was in the Championship at Coventry, and he was, in my opinion, pretty easily the best player in the Championship. And I think that they probably deserved to go up last season, but they didn't. And I had him marked as a player that I would have liked to have seen Tottenham actually chase after, but I think he went to Sporting really early on in the window, so he didn't. No other clubs really had a chance to go after him, and he has just had another fantastic season from the numbers that I can tell. I think that the questions about physicality for him, I think, are pretty well answered by playing in the Championship, because obviously that's the physicality down there is up to, and for some teams probably even more than the Premier League, I would say. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. I think he's a fantastic striker, and I would love to have him, depending on obviously the quoted price. With Solanke, I think that Solanke had a fantastic season last season. I don't think you can argue against that, especially the way that Bournemouth played. I think fit the way that he played really well, and I can't tell that means that he would be worse in our system, better than our system. I watched Bournemouth a bit, but I haven't watched them in depth enough, I guess, to make any sort of educated statement that isn't coming out of my ass. So I'll try to refrain from doing that. But to go to the other Swede that we're looking at as a 9, Kulusevski, I think that it is easy to think about it and write it off, because you say, oh, he's a winger, he doesn't play 9, that doesn't make sense. But then you think about the way that Ange likes to score goals, and we're not the type of team that is swinging balls in and you've got to head it. We had Son at striker for half the season, and that's not his game either. Obviously, there are going to be points in time where we want to do that, but if a lot of our shots are coming from low crosses, a lot of our shot creating opportunities come from low crosses that come on the ground, then it's not as important to have someone who's as physically aerially dominant as someone like a Richarlison, Gyökeres, or Solanke. It is important to have someone who can hold the ball up well. And throughout the entirety of last season, I think that the thing that we all said Kulusevski the most, the thing that we all agreed that he was the best at, was holding onto the ball and carrying the ball forward. And I think those are two incredibly important things to be able to do in Ange's system. So while I'm not going to come out here and say that he's going to be a fantastic 9 and that we don't need to look anymore and that we've solved it, I don't think that it's as out there as I myself thought at first glance after thinking about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The obvious thing with Decky is his pace isn't great. So when you're talking about somebody through the middle, then that's the most. Kane clearly had the same. No, you're not going to making a serious comparison between the two, but that was obviously a huge deficit in Kane's armory as well. But I think what I've been really impressed by, and it's not really that surprising, but like watching Kulusevski in that role, his ability to get into good positions, his quick feet are really impressive. The goal he scored against the K-League team, I thought it was a really quite a sharp finish, actually. And just seems to, I mean, we say it over and over, the confidence issue when it comes to players, especially goal scorers. And at the moment, he just seems to be getting on with things quietly. And I definitely think that's something that he can make a contribution where he's probably, in all likelihood, not going to be your main man who's going to be bagging 20 goals. But it does give Ange another option, which we probably wouldn't have thought of before, if there is an issue with availability of other personnel. And it may be, especially with, I'm sure we'll be getting onto the youth aspect. Lanksheare, I know he's not playing against Premier League opponents in this tour yet, but he's done everything you could really realistically expect of him. And I think another sort of another realization probably that we'd imagine Ange has come to is that Scarlett is probably gone, I would say. And I think Lanksheare is very much knocking on the door, certainly to be ahead of Elise as well. And, a player who can come off the bench. And certainly in the Europa League and in cup games, you would imagine could feature fairly prominently. I hope so, because there's a lot of potential with him too. So it's not like a disastrous situation. It's probably not what we want, given that we are sort of pushing for a Champions League and to improve on where we were last year, with a hope that maybe we're building to being really competitive the year after this one. That's kind of what you're looking at the Ange profile. You think, okay, Tottenham should be getting much closer to be really bridging the gap with the bigger teams, but I think they're just further ahead with their projects. But so I think that Kulusevski has definitely got a future in there, and his overall contribution to the preseason has been really, really superb. He's been probably the best Tottenham player, I would say, over the course of the games.
And just to address Kulusevski's speed a little bit, I did some cursory research about this actually. I couldn't find like an average speed for the Premier League, but I looked in La Liga, which is, I would say, pretty reasonable to compare the two. And it looked like the average speed was around 30 kilometers an hour. And the average top speed was about 30 kilometers an hour. And Kulusevski's is 32. So he's still above average. And you also have to take into account that he is one of the players that covers the most ground per match of anybody in our squad, usually by a considerable margin.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to see if he was like focusing more on quick bursts of speed instead of just covering everything on the right side all the time, especially because when you're playing on the right, you need to be covering for Porro a bit more. Because of the way that we play. I'm interested to see if that would have a positive impact on his how he would be perceived in terms of quickness.
Djed, do you have any thoughts on this topic? And when you've had your closing comments on this, I want you to also answer. We spoke a bit about Lanksheare, but whether you think Moore is also ready to really put a marker on a position in the team.
Well, that's slow. I remember a lot of goals when he was in Italy where he'd get the ball and he was able to, good ball control, good physicality to keep it, but also he was able to keep ahead of the defender. So I think that could be a serious role for him where he can carve out a niche where he really adds value. So that could be something we look at. With regards to Lanksheare, I'm still hoping we're going to bring in a striker, which unless we sell Richie, I think he needs to go out on loan because he needs to get minutes. What I don't want is that we make the same mistakes that we've done with Skip and we did with Kyle Walker-Peters before him as a highly touted prospect from the youth. Basically, development stagnates by sitting on the bench and just watching. Because even if we keep him, you can't say, well, get some minutes in the Europa League. Well, if the new striker is playing in the Premier League, that's when Richie's going to get games in the Cups and in the Europa League. We need to have, I think, a serious plan of what we want to do with the kids and how they're going to get minutes and develop. And I think that is going out on loan. that is for me for the likes of Donnelly and Lanksheare, who are older. In the case of Moore, I mean, he's only turning 17 next week, I think. So the guy's still a kid. So I personally would still keep him at the club. And I think he could be someone that does get the odd minute in a cup game. Because, I mean, if you look at what he does and you look at what Solomon's done, I mean, I know Solomon's come out back after 9 months out, 10 months out, but he shows a lot more promise. So I would keep him around. But there's one player that we haven't mentioned that I would like to give a shout out, and that's Spence. That, it's the old famous just like a new signing, but it really is. It's saving us having to go out and buy a right wing back. Ange came out with a comment earlier today or yesterday saying that last season he wanted to give him a chance basically, but Spence didn't take it. And this time he's taken it. And he said, most of the time it's not what managers want. It's about, the path is dependent on the attitude and the performance of the player. So it's all in the player's hands. And it looks like Spence has come back and really convinced both on and off the pitch. And I think it's a huge excitement because Ange said as well that he has the attributes. I mean, it's what we said before. We understand why Paratici bought him for the right hand side of what he bought Udogie for. And now he's got the mentality to go with it. I think he could be a real asset to the squad next season.
Agreed, and that's a good point. But we've got another topic to move on to now, guys. We've got two huge friendlies coming up, and the return of a Spurs legend. We'll always remember that moment where his brother's obviously been heavily linked with the club. You don't often know about players' siblings, but from that time where he marched up through the stands to go defend his brother from getting in a fight. But Eric Dier's back. Are you going to be welcoming him? And the other one is. Obviously, we don't want to joke around too much. Bayern have made a big marquee signing, who we wanted as well, Elise. So I'm excited to see him play as well. So two big players to keep an eye on in that game. Are you excited to see Eric back at the Lane? And it's going to be a bit painful if Elise goes and scores a couple of goals, reminding us of what we've missed out on, right? So we want to start with the Bayern game.
Yeah, did they sign one of our academy kids? I don't know if he ever panned out for us, but I seem to remember that someone from our academies over there as well. Who knows? But I don't know. I love Eric Dier as a person. Have to admit there were times I loved him less as a player, but obviously I'm happy that he's doing well at Bayern, and I won't be at either of the games because I don't live in Korea or the UK. Can't quite make it to either of those, but I will have no ill will towards him when he returns. Same with Elise. I mean, obviously, if you're given the chance to sign for Bayern from Crystal Palace, and it didn't look like we ever mounted any serious kind of inquisition into him. It looked like it was between Bayern and City, I guess. It looked like City were kind of sniffing around there, and I'm happy that it wasn't City because I think that he is a fantastic player, and I think he'll do very well at Bayern. So I'm actually, I think, more interested in anything to see how he plays there.
Johnny, are you looking forward to seeing those familiar faces back at our ground?
Very much. Yeah, I'm going to the game back in Tottenham a week tomorrow. Very much looking forward to that. Taking my daughter for the first time, her first trip to the stadium. So it'll be great. I'm really looking forward to it. It was like the time towards the second half last season when Hugo came out on the pitch after joining in the Los Angeles team and getting a chance to say goodbye. Like, those moments are important, and it'll be lovely to have Eric step out onto the turf again. And he's been it was around 2015, I think, that he joined. Remember he scored in his debut against West Ham, late winner. And kind of right from that moment, he's kind of been close to the hearts of Spurs players. One of those players that I think has been a really loyal servant. Seemed to be, he was always up in a derby. He was always, he didn't hang back. He had a really good attitude. I really enjoyed him. There were obviously towards the kind of last year or two, he was given out to a fair bit. It was kind of a bit of a scapegoat during some of the Conte stuff, especially a little bit lacking in pace and made a few errors. But, you got to look at the bigger picture and think of what he brought the club. And he was, one of the best, especially when he's playing sort of centre defence as a CDM. He was absolutely brilliant. I know he was at one point very strongly linked with Man United, and I really, really didn't want him to leave. And I remember some of the United mates that have asked me about him. It's like, I think he would be a really good signing for you guys, but fortunately he didn't go. Obviously sad with him and the other fellow that Djed alluded to not getting any silverware apart from the Audi Cup or whatever. It's been great to see Dier go over there and be a regular starter for Munich. Not what I expected, I'll be honest with you. And it shows he is a quality player. He's in there, he's keeping out some good players from that starting 11, and it will be brilliant to have him back. The other guy, it will be also. I mean, joking aside, both of those players were really huge for us over the last decade, and I think it's going to be good to see both.
What are your thoughts on the return of Eric?
I mean, I love Eric Dier, and Eric Dier loves me. I think he was always a top professional. He's an intelligent bloke. He's very thoughtful. You can see. I think he's also one of those guys, and the dressing room glue guys, as they refer to over in the States. And because he spoke so many languages, he spoke Portuguese, he spoke Spanish, obviously English. So he could basically mingle with all the different in the squad, which I also think it helps. You always need someone like that. And I felt sorry for the fact that after such a long time, he got so much grief towards the end. And I'm really happy that he's gone over to Bayern, top club, and he's kicked out some big names, one of which is a player that some segments of our fan base still criticize our club for not buying, but clearly he isn't as good as Eric Dier. So that maybe tells you that we were right not to go for him at the time. As for, that Arsenal reject, obviously he won't be playing tomorrow. I just hope his back is okay and he's able to get on the field at White Hart Lane, because, I mean, all joking aside, he does deserve a good send-off.
Oh, yeah, we were only joking. Yeah, Harry, obviously the elephant in the room. You're a legend in most of our. It's just a shame how it won't go into this boring talk. We've had it 100 times. It's just a shame in a way how it ended with a bit of a weird goodbye.
Yeah.
Didn't ever feel. We didn't get that. We didn't get the loving kiss. You never told us we were the best you ever had.
No.
You made out that we'd never made you scream, and then you left. You didn't even leave us a note. And then you kind of rushed together one in the mail. You said it with a second-class stamp as well, recorded off your phone. But all jokes aside,
no class.
You gave us lots of great memories, and we'll always remember you ripping off your mask when you scored that goal against Arsenal.
The other thing about Dier that I loved was, obviously he was famously very, very close buds with Dele Alli. But he was like himself, Sonny as well. You can see there was a huge bond. Like, he was one of those players during the Poch era that was just sort of kind of like personified, I suppose, the that whole team spirit that we had. And I think Stu's right about that. I think his intelligence was very obvious when you heard him talk, and his thoughtfulness. Be interesting to see if he's a career in management ahead, because you would imagine that he's a potential candidate for that if he had that desire. But it's going to be a great occasion, I think, in Tottenham in a week's time. And it'll be interesting to see what the club have got planned, because I'd assume that there'll be something organised as a mark for both of those players. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be nice. But so I did have an ask to those still listening. If you are watching on YouTube, can you just really quickly go on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and subscribe to our audio podcast? Even if you don't use the app, just do it, because it boosts and juices us up on the algorithm, and then we get pushed to more people on there, and advertisers pay us money, which means we can keep doing this for free, which is great. And if you're listening on the audio one and you watch YouTube ever, just quickly go on your app or whatever you're watching this on and click subscribe on here, because 60% of our regular listeners don't subscribe. We had a good flurry though last week. Those of you who did it, we had something like 100 subscribers in the space of an hour from this comment and you guys following up on it. So thank you so much for doing that. Any final pieces to add, anyone, before we shut this conversation down?
Yeah, I don't know if you boys noticed, but went a little bit under the radar. I understand that the Haringey Council have approved permission for Spurs to increase the number of non-football events from 16 to 30 per year, which is really significant from the money point of view. I think some of the things I read was that there are some provisions on that, but there was a reference to a £5 million profit from the 3 nights when Beyonce came a couple of years ago. And if you sort of extrapolate that, so if you're talking about an extra 14 games or so, there's kind of an extra 30 million or 25-30 million for these extra events if you're going to be getting in and around the same kind of money. So it's just we often have the sort of, you guys, especially Stu probably, and Jim, you would be very on top of your financial side of things and your understanding of all that, but it just goes to show, along with all the other things that are happening off the pitch, that the business side of things, if that money is used to support the team, which it is supposed to be doing, then that's all very good news, not just for the club, but also I think for the kind of employment and the rejuvenation of the area. I mean, Tottenham's still not the most salubrious part of London by any stretch, but it's definitely a place that's a lot brighter than it used to be. And Tottenham Hotspur obviously a huge employer in the area. And there was the last thing I read there, which I thought was interesting. Apparently in the press release from Spurs with regard to this whole story, it said that this is contributing 900 million to the London economy. I don't know if that's a sort of accumulation over a number of years, presumably, rather than per annum figure. Yeah. But it's still like there's no doubt that, I mean, I was in Hungary to see Coldplay, and that wouldn't have happened if the Puskás Arena wasn't there, and they were there for 3 or 4 nights. So there are people going in from all over the world to see events at Tottenham. So it's a good thing, and a good PR for the club that we've got this amazing stadium.
Well, it's the average event at Spurs generates 3 million in revenue. I don't know what the profit is off that, but you think of that revenue numbers over. Anyway, what it seems to be equating to is we're getting almost as much from extra events a year that you would get from reaching the semi-final of the Champions League in money every year, even when we're not in the Champions League. So that's huge.
Yeah, but that's revenue versus basically pure profit when you're getting money from,
Well, it's 90 million in revenue for 30 events, but it's about roughly 40 million they reckon in profits, which is significant.
Yeah, that's
you get
right.
that for going out the group of the Champions League. So it's not small amounts. It's the numbers around the 900 million to the economy. We did dive into that before, but it was from building the stadium alone, in just on VAT on building the stadium, generated 200 million. Right, into the economy. So you think $1 billion, 20%. So you've got to think of all the other things that have gone with it, new jobs, etc., etc. It's not surprising that it's contributing such massive numbers. So
and the trickle down, because obviously you're paying these people who then spend the money and etc.
Oh, exactly. If you go to Spurs, you'll find, and if you're coming to Spurs, I think one of our listeners, Kevin's coming, and we're going to meet up with him actually. Thanks for reaching out, Kevin, on that. If anyone else is around and you're coming to games from overseas, let us know, and we meet up before games. So you're welcome to join us for a couple of drinks. But it's all the bar staff and food and beverage staff there. There's no secret that whoever Spurs use, it's typically a lower skilled labour force, but it's giving people entry point into the market, employing local people, getting them those initial jobs who want to work. So it's great. It's great for the area's changed so much in the 15 odd years I've been going to Spurs. So it's for the good. So yeah.
I love supporting the Tottenham Hotspur multimedia.
Yeah, and Tottenham, if you're listening, give Spurs Play for free to members and season ticket holders. You don't put milk in the cow.
Let's at least watch the preseason games for free, man. Come on, man.
Members overseas should get something. I think fans overseas, give them a break. Give them. They're willing to sign up to a £50 a year membership, and they have to fly on an airplane to a game. But at least you give them as a bloody subscription to watch the kids play.
Friendly games and under 21s. I mean, for goodness sake.
Just give them to it. For goodness sake. But anyway, up the Spurs, guys.
Go on, you Spurs.
Go on, you Spurs.
Up the Spurs.